One of the best ways to support the FTF podcast is to check out our Patreon over at patreon.com/finishthefight for exclusive episodes, insights, interviews, and plenty more. Welcome back to Finish the Fight, a gaming podcast,
where we produce and develop the highest quality gaming research in podcast form.
I am your host, Alex Kendall.
And I am your host, Derek Baker.
And today we're going to be taking on a classic game that got a redo about 10 years ago or so, but kind of was sparked again when we see Telltale start with their story-based gaming. And we're going to be talking about another Tim Schafer joint, and that is going to be Grim Fandango.
Yeah, Tim Schafer, he's got these really cool, unique games. He did Brutal Legend, he did Psychonauts. There is, of course, Grim Fandango, the topic of today's episode, but just a really unique, I think, take on gaming from Tim Schafer, and he has introduced these really iconic games as a result.
And so let's jump right into it. Grim Fandango is a 1998 adventure game directed by Tim Schafer and developed and published by LucasArts for Microsoft Windows. It is the first adventure game by LucasArts to use 3D computer graphics overlaid on pre-rendered static backgrounds. As with other LucasArts adventure games, the player must converse with characters and examine, collect, and use objects to solve puzzles. Grim Fandango is set in the land of the dead, through which recently departed souls, represented as Calica-like figures, travel before they reach their final destination. The story follows travel agent Manuel Manny Calavera as he attempts to save new arrival Mercedes Meche Colomar, a virtuous soul, on her journey. The game combines elements of the Aztec afterlife with film noir style, with influences including The Maltese Falcon, On the Waterfront, and Casablanca.
Grim Fandango received praise for its art design and direction. It was selected for several awards and is often listed as one of the greatest video games of all time. However, it was a commercial failure and contributed towards LucasArts' decision to end adventure game development and the decline of the adventure game genre. The critical success of the 2012 video game, Telltale's The Walking Dead, as Alex said, was seen as constituting a revitalization of the adventure genre. In 2014, with help from Sony, Schafer's studio Double Fine Productions acquired the Grim Fandango license following Disney's acquisition and closure of LucasArts as a video game developer the previous year. Double Fine produced a remastered version of the game featuring improved character graphics, controls, including point and click, an orchestrated score, and director's commentary. It was released for Windows, PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, OS X, and Linux in January 2015, for Android and iOS in May of 2015, and for Nintendo Switch in November of 2018, and finally for Xbox One in October of 2020.
And I want to talk a little bit about kind of the establishment and unfortunate selling and closure of LucasArts. In 1979, George Lucas wanted to explore other areas of entertainment and created the Lucasfilm Computer Division in 1979, which included a department for computer games, the Games Group, and another for graphics. The graphics department was spun off into its own corporation in 1982, ultimately becoming Pixar. The Lucasfilm Games Group originally cooperated with Atari Inc., which helped fund the video game group's founding to produce video games. Though the group had spun out of Lucasfilm, the video game development license for Lucasfilm's Star Wars was held by Atari at the time, forcing the group to start with original concepts. Ron Gilbert, one of the group's first employees, believed that if the Lucasfilm Games Group had the rights for Star Wars from the start, they would have never branched into any new intellectual property.
The first products from the Games Group were Unique Action Ball Blazer and Rescue on Fractalus, developed in 1984 for the Atari 5200 console and the Atari 8-bit computers. Beta versions of both games were leaked to pirate bulletin boards exactly 1 week after Atari had received unprotected copies for a marketing review. and were in wide circulation over a year before the original release date. Planned to be released in the third quarter of 1984 under the Atari Lucasfilm label, the games were delayed when Werner Communications sold the assets of the consumer division of Atari Incorporated to Jack Tramiel in July of that year, and were ultimately picked up by publisher Epyx and released for multiple home computers in mid-1985. Lucasfilm's next two games were Coronis Rift and the Eidolon. Their first games were only developed by Lucasfilm, and a publisher would distribute the games. Atari published their games for Atari Systems, Activision and Epyx would do their computer publishing. Maniac Mansion was the first game to be published and developed by Lucasfilm Games. The early charter of Lucasfilm Games was to make experimental, innovative, and technologically advanced video games. Habitat, an early online role-playing game and one of the first to support a graphical front end, was one such title. It was only released as a beta test in 1986 by Quantum Link, an online service for the Commodore 64. Quantum Link could not provide the bandwidth at the time to support the game, so the full Habitat was never released outside of the beta test. However, Lucasfilm Games recouped the cost of development by releasing a sized-down version called Club Carabé in 1988. Lucasfilm later licensed the software to Fujitsu, who released it in Japan as Fujitsu Habitat in 1990. Fujitsu later licensed Habitat for worldwide distribution and released an updated version called Worlds Away in 1995. The latest iteration of Habitat is still called Worlds Away, which can be found at Metro Worlds.
Initially, the games group worked from Lucas's Skywalker Ranch near Nicasio, California. In 1990, in a reorganization of the Lucas companies, the games division of Lucasfilm became part of the newly created LucasArts Entertainment Company, which also comprised Industrial Light and Magic and Skywalker Sound. Later, ILM and Skywalker Sound were consolidated in Lucas Digital Limited, and LucasArts became the official name of the former games division. During this, the division had moved out of Skywalker Ranch to nearby offices in San Rafael, California. Also in 1990, LucasArts started to publish The Adventurer, their own gaming magazine where one could read about their upcoming games and interviews with the developers. The final issue was published in 1996. In the same year, Lucas Learning was created as a subsidiary of LucasArts, providing educational software for classrooms. The first adventure game developed by Lucasfilm Games was Labyrinth in 1986, based on the Lucasfilm movie of the same name. The 1987 title Maniac Mansion introduced Scum, the scripting language behind most of the company's later adventure offerings. The adventures released in the following years, such as Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders in 1988, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, The Graphic Adventure in 1989, and the 1990 titles Loom and The Secret of Monkey Island, helped Lucasfilm Games build a reputation as one of the leading developers in the genre. The original 5 adventure games created with Scum were released in a compilation titled LucasArts Classic Adventures in 1992.
LucasArts was often referred to as one of the two big names in the field, competing with Sierra Online as a developer of high-quality adventures. The first half of the 1990s was the heyday for the company's adventure fame, with classic titles such as Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge in 1991, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis in 1992, Maniac Mansion, Day of the Tentacle, and Sam & Max Hit the Road in 1993, and the 1995 titles Full Throttle and The Dig. In the latter half of the decade, the popularity of adventure games faded, and the costs associated with game development increased as high-resolution art and CD-quality audio became standard fare. The PC market wanted titles that would show off expensive new graphics cards to the best effect, a change replicated in the home console market as the 3D capabilities of the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and Nintendo 64 dictated the nature of the majority of games produced for those platforms. The adventure genre failed to find popularity with the masses of new gamers. Despite their declining popularity, LucasArts still continued to release adventure titles. In 1997, The Curse of Monkey Island, the last LucasArts adventure game to retain traditional two-dimensional graphics and point-and-click interface, was released. This was followed by Grim Fandango in 1998, LucasArts' first attempt to convert a 2D adventure to a 3D environment. The highly styled visuals, outstanding soundtrack, superb voice acting, and sophisticated writing earned Grim Fandango many plaudits, including GameSpot's Game of the Year award.
Now, Grim Fandango's development was led by project leader Tim Schafer, co-designer of Day of the Tentacle and creator of Full Throttle, and the more recent Psychonauts and Brutal Legend, as well as Psychonauts 2. Schafer had conceived a Day of the Dead themed adventure before production of Full Throttle began, and he submitted both concepts to LucasArts for approval at the same time. Full Throttle was accepted, instead because of its greater mainstream appeal. It became a hit and opened the way for Schafer to create Grim Fandango. Rogue Leaders, the story of LucasArts, noted that the pitching process for Grim Fandango was a breeze because of Schafer's earlier success, despite the new project's unusual theme. Development began soon after the completion of Full Throttle in June 1995. Grim Fandango was an attempt by LucasArts to rejuvenate the graphic adventure genre, in decline by 1998. In response to complaints that Full Throttle was too short, Schafer set the goal of having twice as many puzzles as Full Throttle, which demanded a more lengthy and ambitious story to accommodate them. According to Schafer, the game was developed on a $3 million budget. It was the first LucasArts adventure since Labyrinth not to use the Scum engine, instead using the Sith engine, pioneered by Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 as the basis of the new Grime engine. The Grime engine was built using the scripting language Lua. This design decision was due to LucasArts programmer Brett Mogilevsky's interest in the language, and is considered one of the first uses of Lua in gaming applications. The game's success led to languages used in many other games and applications, including Escape from Monkey Island and Baldur's Gate.
Grim Fandango mixed static pre-rendered background images with 3D characters and objects. Part of this decision was based on how the Calico figures would appear in 3 dimensions. There were more than 90 sets and 50 characters in the game to be created and rendered. Manny's character alone comprised 250 polygons. The development team found that by utilizing 3-dimensional models to pre-render the backgrounds, they could alter the camera shot to achieve more effective or dramatic angles for certain scenes simply by re-rendering the background instead of having to have an artist redraw the background for a traditional 2D adventure game. The team adapted the engine to allow Manny's head to move separately from his body to make the player aware of important objects nearby. The 3D engine also aided in the choreography between the spoken dialogue and body and arm movements of the characters. Additionally, full motion video cutscenes were incorporated to advance the plot, using the same in-game style for the characters and backgrounds to make them nearly indistinguishable from the actual game. The game combines several Aztec beliefs of the afterlife and underworld with 1930s Art Deco design motifs and a dark plot reminiscent of the film noir genre. The Aztec motifs of the game were influenced by Schafer's decade-long fascination with folklore, stemming from an anthropology class he took at the University of California, Berkeley, and talks with folklorist Alan Dundas. With Schafer recognizing that the 4-year journey of the soul in the afterlife would set the stage for an adventure game. Schafer stated that once he was set on the afterlife setting, quote, "Then I thought, what role would a person want to play in a Day of the Dead scenario? You'd want to be the Grim Reaper himself. That's how Manny got his job. Then I imagined him picking up people in the land of the living and bringing them to the land of the dead. Like he's really just a glorified limo or taxi driver." So the idea came of Manny having this really mundane job that looks glamorous because he has the robe and the scythe, but really he's just punching the clock. Schafer recounted a Mexican folklore about how the dead were buried with 2 bags of gold to be used in the afterlife, one on their chest and one hidden in their coffin, such that if the spirits in the afterlife stole the one on the chest, it would still have the hidden bag of gold. This idea of a criminal element in the afterlife led to the idea of a crime-ridden film noir style to the world. The division of the game into 4 years was a way of breaking the game's overall puzzle into 4 discrete sections. Each year was divided into several non-linear branches of puzzles that all had to be solved before the player could progress to the next year.
Schaefer opted to give the conversation heavy game the flavor of film noir set in the 1930s and 1940s, stating that, quote, "There's something that I feel is really honest about the way people talked that's different than modern movies." He was particularly inspired by novels written by Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. Several film noir movies were also inspiration for much of the game's plot and characters. Tim Schafer stated that the true inspiration was drawn from films like Double Indemnity, in which a weak and undistinguished insurance salesman finds himself entangled in a murder plot. The design and early plot are fashioned after films such as Chinatown and Glengarry Glen Ross. Several scenes in Grim Fandango are directly inspired by the genre's films such as The Maltese Falcon, The Third Man, Key Largo, and most notably, Casablanca. 2 characters in the game's second act are directly modeled after the roles played by Peter Lorre and Claude Rains in the film. The main villain, Hector LeMans, was designed to resemble Sidney Greenstreet's character of Signor Ferrari from Casablanca. His voice was also modeled after Greenstreet, complete with his trademark chuckle. Visually, the game drew inspiration from various sources. The skeletal character designs were based largely on the calica figures used in Mexican Day of the Dead festivities, while the architecture ranged from Art Deco skyscrapers to an Aztec temple. The team turned to LucasArts artist Peter Chan to create the calica figures. The art of Ed Big Daddy Roth was used as inspiration for the designs of the Hot Rods and the demon characters like Glottis. Originally, Schaefer had come up with the name Deeds of the Dead for the game's title, as he had originally planned Manny to be a real estate agent in the Land of the Dead. Other potential titles included The Long Siesta and Dirt Nap, before he came up with the title Grim Fandango.
And so, of course, a really unique idea for a game, but let's head over to the important part of most video games, and that is the gameplay. Grim Fandango is an adventure game in which the player controls Manny Calavera, Calavera being Spanish for skull, as he follows Mercedes Meche Calamar in the underworld. The game uses the Grime engine, pre-rendering static backgrounds from 3D models, while the main objects and characters are animated in 3D. Additionally, cutscenes in the game have also been pre-rendered in 3D. The player controls Manny's movements and actions with a keyboard, a joystick, or a gamepad. The remastered edition allows control via a mouse as well. Manny must collect objects that can be used with either other collectible objects, parts of the scenery, or with other people in the Land of the Dead in order to solve puzzles and progress in the game. The game lacks any type of HUD. Unlike the earlier 2D LucasArts games, the player is informed of objects or persons of interest not by text floating on the screen when the player passes a cursor over them, but instead by the fact that Manny will turn his head towards the object or person as he walks by. The player reviews the inventory of items that Manny has collected by watching him pull each item in and out of his coat jacket. Manny can engage in dialogue with other characters through conversation trees to gain hints of what needs to be done to solve the puzzles or to progress in the plot. As in most LucasArts adventure games, the player can never die or otherwise get into a no-win situation that prevents completion of the game.
Now, for the setting, Grim Fandango takes place in the Land of the Dead, the 8th Underworld, where recently departed souls aim to make their way to the Land of Eternal Rest, the 9th Underworld, on the 4-year journey of the soul. Good deeds in life are rewarded by access to better travel packages, provided by the Department of Death, to assist in making the journey, such as sports cars and luxury ocean cruises, the best of which is the number 9, an express train that takes 4 minutes to reach the gate to the 9th Underworld. However, souls who did not lead a kind life are left to travel through the Land of the Dead on foot, which would take around 4 years. Such souls often lose faith in the existence of the 9th Underworld and instead find jobs and stay in the Land of the Dead. The travel agents of the Department of Death act as the Grim Reaper to escort the souls from the land of the living to the land of the dead and then determine which mode of transport the soul has merited. Each year, on the Day of the Dead, these souls are allowed to visit their families in the land of the living. The souls in the land of the dead appear as skeletal calico figures. Alongside them are demons that have been summoned to help with the more mundane tasks of day to day life, such as vehicle maintenance and even drink service. The souls themselves can suffer death within death by being sprouted, the result of being shot with Sprautella filled darts that cause flowers to grow out through their bones, rapidly feeding off the calcium of the soul's skeleton. Many of the characters are Mexican, and occasional Spanish words are interspersed into the English dialogue, resulting in Spanglish. Many of the characters smoke, following a film noir tradition. The manual asks players to consider that every smoker in the game is dead.
So even responsible back then.
Exactly.
So we've touched on this a little bit. Let's go ahead and just wrap it up, finish it up in detail. Let's talk about the plot. The game is divided into 4 acts, each taking place on November 2nd, which is the Day of the Dead, in 4 consecutive years. Manuel Manny Calavera is a travel agent at the Department of Death in the city of El Morro. Forced into his job to work off a debt to the powers that be, Manny is frustrated with being assigned clients that must take the 4-year journey due to their poor living choices, and is threatened to be fired by his boss, Don Copal, if he does not come up with better clients. Manny steals a client, Mercedes Meche Calamar, from his successful co-worker Domino Hurley. The department computers assign Meche to the 4-year journey, even though Manny believes she should have a guaranteed spot on the number 9 luxury express train due to her pureness of heart in her life. After setting Meche on her way, Manny investigates further and finds that Domino and Don have been rigging the system to deny many clients double N tickets, hoarding them for the boss of the criminal underworld, Hector Lamans. Lamans then sells the tickets at an exorbitant price to those that can afford it. Manny recognizes that he cannot stop Hector at present, and instead, with the help of his driver and speed demon Glottis, he tries to find Meche on her journey in the nearby petrified forest. During the trip, Manny encounters Salvador Sal Limones, the leader of the small underground organization, the Lost Souls Alliance, or the LSA, who is aware of Hector's plans and recruits Manny to help. Manny arrives at the small port city of Rubacava and finds that he has beaten Meche there and waits for her to arrive. A year passes, and the city of Rubacava has grown. Manny now runs his own nightclub off a converted automat near the edge of the forest. Manny learns from Olivia Ofrenda, the owner of the Beatnik Blue Casket nightclub, that Don has been sprouted for letting the scandal be known and that Meche was recently seen with Domino leaving the port. Manny gives chase and a year later tracks him to a coral mining plant on the edge of the world. Domino has been holding Meche there as a trap to lure Manny. All of Domino's clients who had their tickets stolen are also being held there and used as slave labor, both to make a profit with the coral mining and as a way to keep Hector's scandal quiet. Domino tries to convince Manny to take over his position in the plant, seeing as he has no alternative and can spend the rest of eternity with Meche, but he refuses. After rescuing Meche, Manny defeats Domino by causing him to fall into a rock crusher. Manny, along with Meche, Glottis, and all the souls being held at the plant, then escape from the edge of the world.
The 3 travel for another year until they reach the terminus for the number 9 train before the 9th underworld. The gatekeeper to the 9th underworld won't let the souls progress without their tickets, mistakenly believing they have sold them, and it's further revealed that a wicked soul that has either not paid off their debt or tried to cheat the gatekeeper with a fake or stolen double N ticket to gain entrance to the 9th underworld will cause the express train to transform into the Hell train, which sends all souls on board to Hell. Meanwhile, Glottis has fallen deathly ill. Manny learns from demons stationed at the terminus that the only way to revive Glottis is to travel at high speeds to restore Glottis' purpose for being summoned. Manny and the others devise a makeshift fuel source to create a rocket train cart quickly taking Manny and Meche back to Rubacavra and saving Gladys's life. The three return to El Morro, now found to be fully in Hector's control and renamed as Nuevo Morro. Manny regroups with Sal and his expanded LSA, and with the help of Olivia, who volunteered to join the gang earlier in Rubacavra, and is able to learn about Hector's current activities. Further investigation reveals that Hector not only has been hoarding the number 9 tickets, but has created counterfeit versions that he has sold to others while keeping the real tickets for himself in a desperate attempt to balance out his sinful life and get out of the land of the dead. Manny tries to confront Hector but is lured into another trap by Olivia, who is revealed to be Hector's girlfriend, who has also captured Sal and is taken to Hector's greenhouse to be sprouted. Manny is able to defeat Hector after Sal sacrifices himself to prevent Olivia from interfering. Manny and Meche are able to find the real double N tickets, including the one that Meche should have received. Manny makes sure the rest of the tickets are given to their rightful owners. In turn, he is granted his own ticket for his good deeds. Together, Manny and Meche board the number 9 for their happy journey to the 9th underworld, while Gladys, who can't join them, waves tearfully goodbye.
Definitely a nice, unique story.
Mm-hmm.
And, a game like this that's highly stylized, of course, is going to have some stylized music as well. So let's talk about the music and sound. Grim Fandango has an original soundtrack that combines orchestral score, South American folk music, jazz, bebop, swing, and big band music, inspired by the likes of Duke Ellington and Benny Goodman, as well as film composers Max Steiner and Adolf Deutsch. It also has various influences from traditional Russian, Celtic, Mexican, Spanish, and Indian strings culture. It was composed and produced by Peter McConnell at LucasArts. Others credited are Jeff Clement and Hans Christian Riumschusel, who offered additional music production. The score featured live musicians that McConnell knew or made contact with in San Francisco's Mission District, including a mariachi band. The soundtrack was released as a CD in 1998. The soundtrack was very well received. IGN called it a beautiful soundtrack that you'll find yourself listening to even after you're done with the game. SEMO said, "The compositions and performances are so good that listening to this album on a standalone basis can make people feel like they're in a bar back then." RPG Fan said the pieces are beautifully composed, wonderfully played, has a stellar soundtrack with music that easily stands alone outside the context of the game. This CD was an absolute pleasure to listen to and comes highly recommended. Game Revolution, in its game review, praised it as one of the most memorable soundtracks ever to grace the inside of a cranial cavity where an eardrum used to be. PC Gamer, in its 2014 list of top 100 games, acclaimed Grim Fandango for including one of the best soundtracks in PC gaming history. In 2017, Fact Magazine also listed it as one of the 100 best video game soundtracks of all time. In 1999's Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences Annual Interactive Achievement Awards, the soundtrack was nominated in the category of Outstanding Achievement in Sound and Music. It was also lauded by GameSpot, which awarded it the Best PC Music Awards, and included it in the 10 Best PC Game Soundtracks list in 1999.
Now, after the original Pro Tools sound files were recovered, Peter McConnell found that some of the samples he had used originally did not sound good, and the team opted to reorchestrate the score. The game's soundtrack was fully orchestrated through performances of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra for the remastered version of the game. The remake soundtrack was produced under Nile Rodgers' label Something Else. It had a standard release of 37 tracks, as well as a director's cut with 14 extra tracks, the latter sold exclusively through Something Else. It included the original score from the LucasArts archives, new compositions by Peter McConnell, and new orchestral arrangements, as well as new extended versions of jazz pieces remixed at Sony Computer Entertainment America. In 2018, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the original release of the game, the soundtrack was released for the first time in vinyl format. The game features a large cast for voice acting in the game's dialogue and cutscenes, employing many Latino actors to help with the Spanish slang. Voice actors include Tony Plana as Manny, Maria Canals Barrera as Miche, Alan Blumenfeld as Gladys, and Jim Ward as Hector. Schaefer credits Plana for helping to deepen the character of Manny, as the voice actor was a native Spanish speaker and suggested alternate dialogue for the game that was more natural for casual Spanish conversations. Schaefer planned from the beginning for the voice cast to consist entirely of Latino performers.
Originally, the game was to be shipped in the first half of 1998, but was delayed. As a result, the game was shipped on October 28th of 1998 for release on October 30th, the Friday before November 2nd, which is the actual date of the Day of the Dead celebration. Even with the delay, the team had to drop several of the puzzles and characters from the game, including a climactic 5-step puzzle against Hector LeMans at the conclusion of the game. Schaefer later noted that they would have needed 1 to 2 more years to implement their original designs. A remastered version of Grim Fandango was released for the PlayStation 4, PlayStation Vita, Microsoft Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux platforms on January 27th of 2015. The PS4 and PlayStation Vita versions feature cross-buy and cross-save. It was later released for Android and iOS on May 5th. The remastered version was released as a PlayStation Plus title for the month of January 2016. The remastered version was predicated on the transition of LucasArts from a developer and publisher into a licensor and publisher in 2013, shortly after its acquisition by Disney. Under new management, LucasArts licensed several of its intellectual properties, including Grim Fandango, to outside developers. Schaefer was able to acquire the rights to the game with financial assistance from Sony, and started the process of building out the remaster within Double Fine Productions. Schaefer said that the sale of LucasArts to Disney had reminded them of the past efforts of former LucasArts president Darryl Rodriguez to release the older LucasArts titles as legacy properties, such as the 2009 re-release of The Secret of Monkey Island. Schaefer also noted that they had tried to acquire the property from LucasArts in the years prior, but the frequent change in management stalled progress. When they began to inquire about the rights with Disney and LucasArts following its acquisition, they found that Sony, through their vice president of publisher and developer relations, Adam Boyes, was also looking to acquire the rights. Boyes stated that Sony had been interested in working with a wide array of developers for the PlayStation 4, and was also inspired to seek Grim Fandangos after seeing developers like Capcom and Midway Games revive older properties. Boyes' determination was supported by John Vignacci, VP of Production for Disney Interactive, who also shared memories of the game and was able to bring in contacts to track down the game's assets. After discovering they were vying for the same property, Schaefer and Boyes agreed to work together to acquire the IP and subsequent funding, planning to make the re-release a remastered version. Sony did not ask for any of the IP rights for the game, instead only asking Double Fine to give the PlayStation platform's console exclusivity in exchange for funding support, similar to their pub fund scheme they used to support independent developers.
Now, there was a major complication in remastering the original work, and it was having many of the critical game files go missing or on archaic formats. A large number of backup files were made on digital linear tape or DLT, which Disney and LucasArts had been able to recover for Double Fine, but the company had no drives to read the tapes. Former LucasArts sound engineer Jory Prum had managed to save a DLT drive and was able to extract all of the game's audio development data from the tapes. Schaefer noted at the time of Grim Fandango's original development, retention of code was not as rigorous as present-day standards, and in some cases, Schaefer believes the only copies of some files were unintentionally taken by employees when they had left LucasArts. As such, Schaefer and his team have been going back through past employee records to try to trace down any of them and ask for any files they may have. In other cases, they have had difficulty in identifying elements on the low-resolution artwork of the original game, such as an emblem on one character's hat, and have had to go looking for original concept art to figure out the design. Once original assets were identified as to be used to present the classic look of the game in the remastered edition, Double Fine worked to improve the overall look for modern computers. The textures and lighting models for the characters were improved, in particular for Manny. Schafer has likened the remastering approach to the Criterion Collection film releases in providing a high fidelity version of the game without changing the story or the characters. In addition to his own developers, Schafer reached out to players who had created unofficial patches and graphical improvements of the original game, and modifications needed to keep it running in residual VM, and gained their help to improve the game's assets for the remastered version. One such feature was a modified control scheme that converted the game's movement controls from the tank controls to a point-and-click style interface. Schafer said the team used tank controls as it was popular with other games like Resident Evil at the time, but recognized it did not work well within the adventure game genre. Schafer contacted Tobias Pfaff, who created the point-and-click modification, to obtain access to his code to incorporate into the remastered version.
Double Fine demonstrated an in-progress version of the remastered game at IndieCade event in October 2014. New features included higher resolution textures and improved resolution for the character models, as well as having real-time lighting models, and the ability to switch back and forth between this presentation and the original graphics at the touch of a control. The remastered game runs in 4:3 aspect ratio, but has an option to stretch this to a 16:9 ratio rather than render in the native 4:3. The remaster includes improvements to the control scheme developed by Pfaff's patch and other alternate control schemes, in addition to the original tank-like controls, including analog controls for console versions and point-and-click controls for computer versions. The game's soundtrack was fully orchestrated through performances of the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, who also performed the soundtrack for Double Fine's Broken Age. The remastered version also includes developer commentary, which can be activated via the options menu and listened to at various points in the game. The PlayStation version also features cloud saving between the PS4 and Vita versions. A Nintendo Switch port was released on November 1st, 2018. Double Fine was acquired by Xbox Game Studios in 2019, and Grim Fandango for the Xbox One arrived in 2020.
In 2005, The Guardian characterized the game as, quote, the last genuine classic to come from LucasArts, the company that helped define adventure games. Tim Schafer's Noir pastiche follows skull-faced Manny Calavera through a bureaucratic parody of the Land of the Dead. With a look that takes from both Mexican mythology and Art Deco, Grim Fandango is as unique an artistic statement as mainstream gaming has managed to offer. While loved by devotees, its limited sales prompted LucasArts to back away from original adventures to simply exploit franchises. Eurogamer's Jeffrey Mottaleff, in a 2012 retrospective look, believed that Grim Fandango's combination of film noir and the adventure game genre was the first of its kind and a natural fit due to the script-heavy nature of both, and would later help influence games with similar themes like that of Ace Attorney and LA Noir. Grim Fandango has been considered a representative title demonstrating video games as an art form. The game was selected in 2012 as a candidate for public voting for inclusion within the Smithsonian Institution's The Art of Video Games exhibit, while the Museum of Modern Art seeks to install the game as an exhibit as part of its permanent collection within the Department of Architecture and Design.
The game was included in the Game Masters exhibition, organized in 2012 by the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, or the ACMI, an event devoted to exploring the faces and the history behind computer games. Tim Schafer was featured as the creative force behind Grim Fandango, within the exhibition section called Game Changers, crediting him along with a few other visionary game designers for having pushed the boundaries of game design and storytelling, introducing new genres, creating our best-loved characters, and revolutionizing the way we understand and play games. Grim Fandango has been the centerpiece of a large fan community for the game that has continued to be active more than 10 years after the game's release. Such fan communities include the Grim Fandango Network and the Department of Death, both of which include fan art and fiction in addition to other original content. In an interview with Kotaku after the announcement of the remaster, Schafer stated that he has long considered the idea of a Grim Fandango sequel to further expand on the setting of the game. He felt the story would be a difficult component, as either they would have to figure a means to bring Manny back from his final reward, or otherwise build the story around a new character. One option he has considered to alleviate the issue is by creating an adventure game using an open-world mechanic similar to the Grand Theft Auto series.
Now, as we see the legacy that Grim Fandango has left, we'll also talk about how it was received by critics. Grim Fandango gained critical acclaim upon its release. Metacritic gave the game a score of 94 out of 100. Critics lauded the art direction in particular, with GameSpot rating the visual design as consistently great. PC Zone emphasized the production as a whole, calling the direction, costumes, characters, music, and atmosphere expertly done. They also commented that the game would make a superb film. The San Francisco Chronicle stated, quote, "Grim Fandango feels like a wild dance through a cartoonish film noir adventure. Its wacky characters, seductive puzzle-filled plot, and a nearly invisible interface allows players to lose themselves in the game, just as cinema-goers might get lost in the movie." The Houston Chronicle, in naming Grim Fandango the best game of 1998, along with Half-Life, complimented the graphics, calling them jaw-dropping, and commented that the game is full of both dark and light humor. IGN summed its review up by saying the game was the best adventure game it had ever seen. Next Generation reviewed the PC version of the game, rating it 5 stars out of 5, and stated that Grim Fandango is a smart, beautiful, and enjoyable adventure game that will leave you holding your breath, waiting for Grim Fandango 2.
The game also received criticisms from the media. Several reviewers noted that there were difficulties experienced with the interface, requiring a certain learning curve to get used to, and selected camera angles for some puzzles were poorly chosen. The use of elevators in the game was particularly noted as troublesome. The review from Adventure Gamers expressed dislike of the soundtrack and at times found it too heavy and not well suited to the game's theme. A Computer and Video Games review also noted that the game had continuous and long data loading from the CD-ROM that interrupted the game and, quote, spoils the fluidity of some sequences and causes delays. In 1999, Next Generation listed Grim Fandango as number 26 on their top 50 games of all time, commenting that Grim offered adventure fans funny, touching, and infuriating moments in following its characters, and it did so through a magnificently beautiful game. Initial estimates suggested that Grim Fandango sold well during the 1998 holiday season. It debuted at number 6 for the first week of November on PC Data's computer game sales charts at an average retail price of $35. It was absent by its second week. In the United Kingdom, Grim Fandango claimed first place on ChartTrack's weekly sales chart in December before falling to 9th place. It secured 12th after 4 weeks and 24th at the 13-week mark. The game sold 58,617 copies and earned $2.33 million in the United States by the end of 1998 and rose to 95,000 sales there by March of 2000, according to PC Data. Grim Fandango sold another 16,157 units in the region during 2001 and 8,032 in the first 6 months of 2002. Its jewel case SKU reached 5,621 sales during 2003. According to Tim Schafer, the game achieved sales of approximately 500,000 units by 2012, around 50% fewer than Full Throttle had achieved. It is commonly considered a commercial failure, even though LucasArts stated that Grim Fandango met domestic expectations and exceeded them worldwide. The game had become profitable by 2000, although Dave Grossman has said it was pretty ambitious and expensive, and I don't think it made very much money back. A writer for Edge summarized in 2009, while its reputation as a flop isn't entirely accurate, Grim's sales were either an indication that people preferred motorbikes to smoking corpses, or a sign of the times. Adventure games were simply on their way out.
While LucasArts proceeded to produce Escape from Monkey Island in 2000, they canceled development of sequels to Sam and Max Hit the Road and Full Throttle, stating that, quote, after careful evaluation of current marketplace realities and underlying economic considerations, we've decided that this was not the appropriate time to launch a graphic adventure on the PC. Subsequently, the studio dismissed many of the people involved with their adventure game, some of whom went on to set up Telltale Games, creating an episodic series of Sam and Max games. These events, along with other changes in the video game market towards action based games, are seen as primary causes in the decline of the adventure game genre. Grim Fandango's underperformance was seen as a sign that the genre was commercially dead to rival Sierra as well. LucasArts stated in 2006 that they do not plan on returning to adventure games until the next decade. Ultimately, the studio stopped developing video games in 2013 after the Walt Disney Company acquired Lucasfilms and was dissolved shortly thereafter. Tim Schafer left LucasArts shortly after Grim Fandango's release and created his own company, Double Fine Productions, in 2000, along with many of those involved in the development of Grim Fandango. The company has found similar critical success with their first title, Psychonauts. Schafer stated that while there is strong interest from fans and that he would love to go back and spend time with the characters from any game he's worked on, a sequel to Grim Fandango or his other previous games is unlikely as, quote, I always want to make something new. With the help of developers such as Double Fine and Telltale Games, adventure games saw a resurgence in the 2010s with financially successful titles such as Broken Age, The Walking Dead, and The Wolf Among Us. And this kind of brings us to that wrap and talking about really that idea that LucasArts has, like, we're not going to touch them for a decade because of shifting market trends, shifting things. And it's unfortunate because this adventure games, or like point and click games, as we kind of call a lot of them now, are such a fun little break in the monotony of gaming and are just fun games to play. And it is cool to see Double Fine do that in things like Broken Age and see a lot of the staff, form Telltales. So it's neat to see where this has come from. I think it's suffered truly from the times and not in the setting or game itself. I mean, what do you kind of think of that?
No, I agree with that because I think that gaming was starting to shift to. I mean, there was a point in the middle of the episode where we talked about how, the graphics of the PlayStation and the N64 and the Sega Saturn were sort of setting the bar for what video games should look like. And along with that design, I think also came a little bit more action oriented gameplay where it's not about hanging back. And a lot of PC games were that. So it's like as much as it was an exciting game and like a really unique fun thing, I think you're absolutely right that because this is sort of on the tail end of all that stuff, it sort of has a similar story to Psychonauts in that regard, right? Where it's just like not necessarily hitting at the correct time. Where
Yeah.
Psychonauts was maybe a little ahead of its time. This one was maybe a little behind.
I think it was a good mix because Psychonauts was like, what if adventure game, but a little bit of platform, a little bit of other stuff, basically taking the roots that Schaefer's coming from and creating this pet project he had. Like, if you go back to our Psychonauts episode or anything else that we talk about with Tim Schafer, of just like how passionate he truly is in the games that he creates. And Psychonauts 2, for him, should have never been a thing, but I think pressure from Microsoft, but also just his love of creating those characters and creating that scenario of it, really brought Double Fine into creating Psychonauts 2, which was a commercial success.
Sure.
Which sold really, really well. And it just goes to show you at most of this, especially in gaming in the indie sphere, if we want to call it that, really is timing and really depends on kind of what the cravings of people are.
Yeah. No, it absolutely does. And, another difficult aspect of creating remasters, creating sequels is, capturing a little bit of that magic in the bottle, sure, but
Hmm.
also just sort of understanding your limitations. I think you have to be very clear minded about your end goal when you're doing something like that. He spent a lot of time creating this world and these characters, and I think that most Tim Schafer Double Fine products do a great job of that. The issue, I think, becomes, are those worlds enough to spawn like a series, a
Hmm.
franchise? I don't think so. I think that they're really great, unique games, and I'm okay with that. I would like to see more of that. But we live in a world now where the amount of effort and investment that has to take place for something like that to happen at the beginning, people don't want a one off. They want, how many things how many games can we make out of this content? We need
Yes.
a really in-depth universe. We need a bible for all this stuff. We need so much content that we couldn't possibly fit it all into one game, and we're going to give it to them through, multiple games, sort of trickled out. I think that's the approach to modern games, at least most of them. And that just doesn't really align with, I think, Tim Schafer's philosophy on gaming. So, I know he talked about a Grim Fandango sequel and how difficult that would be. Do you bring Manny back from his reward? Do you create a whole new character? It's so much effort into something that, while you really love the universe that you created, and maybe it's hard to let go of that, I think it's important that you do that so that people don't
Hmm.
look at that game in a bad light instead.
Yeah, and I think it's like you said, most AAA is that 10-year plan, 15-year plan. Starfield was going to be around 10 years, people were going to be playing it. And we're just seeing that most people are kind of sick and tired of that.
Yeah.
We saw that in MMOs. We saw that into games like Overwatch and all these other spin-offs that were like, now we're just going to have battle passes. We're going to have these things you're going to play forever. There's seasons. And for some, like I definitely enjoyed that for a while. But when we're talking about single player games or multiplayer heavy games that may not consist of like round after round after round, I think people are just like, hey, I want something that's a little different.
Yeah.
And that's really what, let's go back. LucasArts did. I mean, Day of the Tentacle, Grim Fandango is part of that, Full Throttle, and Escape from Monkey Island. I mean, they're all these quintessential LucasArts humor filled games that like ran the cusp of like being for kids, but also adults at the same time. And they're so enjoyable. They're enjoyable today. Day of the Tentacle is one of my favorite point and click silly games that is super fun, that is such an enjoyment to do. And even Double Fine's like modern take on kind of like a fighting style game in a way is Costume Quest. And it's so cool to see their different varieties in art style and gameplay and things that are never supposed to truly be a AAA commercial success, but they're brainchilds that come together and make a really fun indie game.
Yeah, and this isn't really necessarily, I guess, a conversation on Grim Fandango or even Double Fine specifically, but when you look at the market and the type of games that we get now, success and failure are really measured by the amount of money that those games make. And
Hmm.
I think that that kills a lot of games like the ones that Tim Schafer wants to make, unfortunately, and that bums me out a little bit. We say like support indie game developers and things like that. And I do think that people will get behind projects that they are passionate about. And you see Grim Fandango and its fan base and how dedicated they were, and these fan made patches and all these things to keep the game alive. I mean, it had a lot of that, but then you say, oh well, this game, it was so expensive to make, it wasn't really successful as far as those metrics go. It's
Hmm.
a it just puts a lot of the Double Fine games in a really tough spot from the outset. Where I think that, for the remaster, he was able to sort of benefit from the distance between when this game was released and when they were actually looking at that remaster, because he had some people in some high up positions that were just fans of the game from
Yep.
when they played it way back when. And so I think that things like that lending itself to a little bit of a unique situation and actually getting a remaster made for a game that wasn't necessarily commercially successful.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, and we're seeing more and more of, it's not new, but we're seeing more and more remasters come out. And I think there's so many games that throw that around in different terms, whether it's a remaster, a reskin, a full rebuild. There's many ways to do it, and we see games like the Grand Theft Auto series that came out in that triple pack that's just awful, and that was considered a remaster, versus this, which is built totally from the ground up, rescored, art is totally redone and brought back to the same feel, and the passion goes along. It wasn't just a cash grab. It was a, hey, here's a passion project we're going to do. We're going to acquire these. We're so excited to be able to put this together. And it's lovely to see. And it's lovely to see the remasters they've been able to create and put together. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful to see a company that truly cares about the product they're creating. And that's why, for me, I stick and have really stuck for a long time to the indie field. These are developers typically where it's a passion project. If it's not, they're at least coming together with a small team building a really cool game that has a really cool concept that AAA titles wouldn't touch. You and I were talking about Balatro. It's a poker roguelite. I mean, you wouldn't see Activision jumping in on that. You wouldn't see like
No.
all these like big companies trying to be like, that's dumb.
Yeah.
Rockstar tried that. Rockstar tries some things like that. We're not doing those things. And so when you have something cool like this come out, it's really, really neat.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I don't think the passion will ever be questioned from Tim Schafer products,
Hmm.
Tim Schafer led products, I should say. But it's just, I don't know. It's a weird, I think, environment that we live in right now with media in general. There's a lot of
Hmm.
shift that is happening. Like people are getting a little fatigued of the constant reboots and, all of the rehashings of old content, because it is like I think just a little less expensive. And so we're seeing a lot of the effects of that. So, maybe we get this sequel some point in the future, maybe not. I do want to talk a little bit about this game and its setting though, because I think that it's really cool. I think that I I really wish that more games started off with sort of simple funny ideas like that. Like,
Hmm.
what if this whole underworld, afterlife exists, and it's really like not all that different from our day to day. And you got to go on this journey, this 4-year journey, and it could either be good or really quick, depending on what kind of person you were in life. I think that that's a really awesome commentary on this celebration for Day of the Dead, where it's just a little bit of like, it could be a joking conversation even between you and I,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, yeah, wouldn't it be funny if you were like a cab driver in hell? What kind of people would you come across? Oh, well, there's all these different problems that could arise. And I think that applying like normal day to day monotony in the worlds like that just help to bring such a great connection drawn to the real world. And you could say like you're looking for an escape in video games. You don't want them to be anything like your normal day to day life, but there's a certain, I think, comedy and fun aspect to that to really think about, oh man, even these supernatural beings having to deal with the same like, oh man, like the coffee pot is dirty again.
Yeah.
I guess I got to clean that in the break room. Oh man, I don't want to go to the water cooler because there's two other people over there. Like thinking about a spirit in the afterlife, having to be concerned about that stuff still, just as I think a really great satire and irony.
Yeah. All of that's just, it's whenever you could take an environment like that And like you said, the monotony and just things that really wouldn't happen are like, yeah, who is changing the coffee filters down with the dead? Who is putting this monotonous stuff together? Who's making this happen? And we start off, as we had talked about, that monotony of it, and it builds into this beautiful story about this redemption arc that happens, and this person who is just trying to be like, this is what I'm doing. I'm just a ferryman now, into like, hey, like you actually were able to save these people. That is so fantastic. So I love it. I really enjoyed it. As we kind of come to wrap it up, Derek, let the people know, why did we choose this overall? We've talked about a lot, but why did we choose this particular game over other ones, and what do we think of it?
Yeah, I think that you and I really appreciate unique games that
Mhm.
just are sort of trying to push the envelope. They want to break the mold, and I think Grim Fandango fits that role just 100% perfectly. Tim Schafer, just great. A lot of respect, I think, for him as a developer. And I love noir style media in general. I think
Mhm.
it's really fun. I loved LA Noir as a game. I think that there is some good satire and comedy that really comes out of a very iconic era of American filmmaking in particular when it comes to like the noir genre and just how overly dramatic it can be and sort of how this one sort of I think differentiates itself from like a typical noir where it's sort of a I don't know, like a not so happy ending. It's sort of like in the middle of it, but this one does have the happy ending, so it even breaks the mold in that satire. um
Mhm.
which I appreciate a lot. As far as like puzzles and point and click and things, we didn't touch on all that stuff a lot. I mean, I think that it does a decently good job of those things, but obviously that was not where a lot of the focus was. It was in the story and the world and all the things that they were able to do within that. So I appreciate it a lot for that. 7 out of 10 for me. What about you?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Is like going from a tank control as it originally was into adapting it to the point and click that we love with it. It is a huge jump for that remaster. I mean, if we're even just talking about a remaster, it's a fantastic port for it. Absolutely love it. If I had to give it a rating, I would give it Un Poco Loco out of the other songs from Coco, which is a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. And if you want to know what Day of the Dead is and kind of like the passing on or being able to see the family again, watch that movie. Coco's a great movie. Out of 10.
I was trying to remember what Disney movie it was. I was like, Encanto? No, it's not Encanto. It's Coco.
Mhm.
So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Oh, yeah, Coco's great. I'm here for the Coco. Hot or dead.
Research for this episode was done by Alex Kendall and Derek Baker. The intro and outro music for this podcast was given to us by our friend Evan Barr, and our lovely artwork was provided by Aaron Shattuck.
Beautiful people, as well as those beautiful people on our Patreon. You can check us out at patreon.com/finishthefight, where you can check out some physical and digital rewards, as well as plenty of other things for you to see. I want to thank a few select members today with Snide T-Bird, Nick Hyman, Anthony Gooch, and Seth Ralston. Thank you so much for your support.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or most likely your favorite podcast listening platform. If you haven't yet, please drop us a review. It helps us out a lot. We love to hear from you. And if you are a Spotify listener, we have Q&As in every episode. Love the participation. Love to talk to you guys a little bit about the episode in particular. And we read all of those answers, and you might get yours published.
Absolutely. And you can catch us on Twitch. You can see me at twitch.tv/sourman70. That's twitch.tv/sourman70, as well as Derek over at twitch.tv/thebakerman247. That is twitch.tv/thebakerman247.
You can follow this podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and we are also on Discord. It's free to join. There is a link in the description of the episode below, and we're talking pretty much anything there: movies, games, food, pets, you name it. Halo show, I think, is the topic of right now, with the new season out, but this will release, I don't know, like in a month from now. So we'll see if we're still talking about that. But either way, we'll be talking about something. Come hang out. We'd love to see you there.
And with that, this has been our coverage of Grim Fandango. Are there any other cult classics that you want us to cover? Any adventure games you want us to dig into? Any other games that kind of failed at the end of the style life cycle? Let us know. We'll cover it and let you guys hear about what's happening in the gaming industry. As always, I am your host, Alex Kendall.
And I am your host, the Derek Reaper.
And this has been Finish the Fight, a gaming podcast.